Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, several cough and cold syrups made in India are subject to a product alert after the deaths of 66 children in the Gambia. WHO alert warns that the substances are toxic and the organisation's worried about global exposure. Also, footage and images of Burkina Faso proudly raising their Russian flags during their country's second military takeover this year have made headlines around the world. Although Russia's increasingly ostracised internationally, some African enthusiasm for the Kremlin continues to deepen. We talk to our correspondents on the ground. And cannabis farmers in Morocco counting on plans to legalise their crop, grow increasingly frustrated at hold-ups to the implementation of a change to the law that should allow them to profit from the medicinal marijuana market. But first, a global medical product alert has been issued for 4 Indian-made cough and cold medicines that could be linked to the deaths of 66 children in the Gambia. After having been alerted by authorities there, the WHO, the World Health Organization, has rushed to raise the alarm about promethazine oral solution, Cofexmalin baby cough syrup, Macof baby cough syrup, and Magrip and cold syrup. Last month, Gambia's health ministry asked hospitals to stop using syrup paracetamols, pending the outcome of an investigation after over 24 children died of kidney failure. It's not clear if the contaminated medicines were supplied elsewhere. I'm joined now by Dr. Margaret Harris from the WHO. Dr. Harris, thanks so much for speaking to us. First of all, what do we know about the connection between the cough medicines and the deaths of those 66 children in the Gambia?
Good evening, Georgia, and thank you so much for your efforts to raise this issue. This is critical that all people are aware not to use these products, and if they have them in their homes, to contact the authorities and not use them. What do we know at the moment? This alert was raised because, tragically, 66 children have died of renal failure in the Gambia. And when some of the medicines they were given were tested, they found that these medicines had contamination. Now, that doesn't prove the link yet. More work needs to be done. But we know that diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol, basically stuff that's in antifreeze and air conditioning, are in these medicines, and they should never be in medicines.
Now, the Gambian authorities, once a problem was flagged up on their side, moved quickly to do the research, moved quickly to reach out to you. Nevertheless, is there anything that you think that could have been done or should have been done to minimise the likelihood of something like this, like this happening?
We as the world have to do a great deal more. 1 in 10 medicines in low and middle income countries are substandard or falsified. So these are dangerous medicines. And this often happens because 2 billion people don't have access to healthcare and to the systems, the chains that provide the safe medicine. So all of us, need to do far better in terms of getting access to safe and good healthcare to people around the world.
And is there any knowledge as to whether the problem area is confined just to the Gambia, or are you worried about the products having spread elsewhere?
Well, certainly the manufacturer says they only sent them to the Gambia, but we know that there are many informal networks, which means that such medicines could indeed have gone to neighbouring countries, could even have gone beyond Africa. So that's, again, why I really appreciate your efforts to raise this issue. It's very important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret Harris from the WHO. Well, 3 Rwandan journalists who were detained for 3 years have been acquitted of charges of spreading fake news. On Wednesday, Damascene Mutuyimana, Shadrach Niyonsenga and Jean-Baptiste Shimiyima were finally freed after having been first arrested in 2018. Clément de Roma reports from Kigali.
After they spent 4 years in pre-trial detention, it only took a few minutes for a Rwandan court to acquit the three journalists of all charges. They headed up the Iwachu TV news channel and when they were arrested in 2018. At the time, Iwachu had more than 200,000 subscribers and the trio were accused, amongst other things, of having disseminated false information. The prosecution had pushed for a 22 years prison sentence, a request that the NGO Committee to Protect Journalists had slammed as shocking. On Wednesday, the High Court in Kigali ordered the trio's acquittal and immediate release after ruling that prosecutors hadn't provided sufficient evidence. Here in Kigali, defendants and their families says that they're relieved at the outcome, but also say that the journalists have already spent years behind bars for crimes they did not commit. The defense team says that his clients only publish the truth and hopes the court's decision will prevent a similar injustice in the future. Human Rights Watch says that since 2018, more than 10 bloggers, journalists and YouTube commentators have been detained, arrested or prosecuted in Rwanda. Last year, the same court sentenced 2 YouTubers to 15 and 7 years in prison, respectively. They were charged with publication of rumors, amongst other charges.
Clément Diruma there, speaking to us from Rwanda. Now, Nigeria says that its militaries freed the final 23 hostages from a train attack in northern Kaduna State earlier this year. Dozens of people were abducted and 8 killed when gunmen from extremist group Boko Haram blew up the tracks and targeted the train in March. The government hasn't yet given details about how the captives were released, but the kidnappers had been letting hostages go in batches. Regional leaders seem confident that Burkina Faso's new military leaders will stick to the timeline for democratic transition agreed with their predecessors. Since last week's coup, footage and images of Burkinabés proudly raising the Russian flag during their country's second military takeover this year have been making headlines around the world, as Russia's increasingly criticised in Europe and elsewhere for its invasion of Ukraine. Many across Africa continue to sing its praises. After Mali and the Central African Republic, Burkina Faso is the latest to do so. Our reporters spoke with experts on the ground to better understand this enthusiasm for Moscow.
This was Burkina Faso's second coup in a year, and this one had larger international resonance than what we've seen in the past. French institutions in particular were targeted, attacked and ransacked, like this visa office of the embassy, or rather the consulate in Ouagadougou. We also saw strong support for Russia and some Russian flags flying around the streets of Ouagadougou. And many have argued that this is linked to France's colonial history. But that doesn't necessarily explain why Burkinabés would turn to Russia specifically. We spoke to an analyst who argues Russia does represent an emancipation from the former colonial power, but soft power and symbolism only go so far.
People need peace. People need to be safe. If you look, people that are doing their business, they are doing their paperwork, are working hard. People need to have their villages to farm. They need to have. It's not. They are more, very less concerned about this politics. France, Russia, America. The large majority of people are not talking about it. We need peace. Who can bring us peace?
The new leader, Ibrahim Traoré, publicly said that he would make it his mission to regain control of the land lost to terrorist groups, and that he was open to receiving help from Moscow in the fight against Islamic extremism. 10,000 people have perished in terrorist attacks in 2015, and some 2 million people have had to flee their homes because of insecurity. Russia, through its paramilitary group Wagner, is already present in at least 6 other African countries, and it remains to be seen whether Burkina Faso will be the latest addition to that list, or if Burkina Faso will seek out other partners. According to the expert we spoke to, Russian involvement in Burkina Faso, if any, is most likely to be a material one than an active commitment to send troops on the ground.
That insight there from Sophie Lamotte on the ground for us in Burkina Faso. Now, Morocco's marginalised Rif region's long been a major source of hashish smuggled into Europe. Farmers now hope that new legislation could help them profit legally from medicinal cannabis. But over a year after the law was approved, little progress has been made on that front. Laura Berstecker tells us more.
High up in the Moroccan mountains, vast cannabis fields stretch as far as the eye can see. The crop has been cultivated in this region for centuries, but farmers have recently seen a drastic drop in earnings, despite a government plan to legalize cannabis for medicinal and therapeutic use.
There's a real crisis in the so-called traditional cannabis sector. Farmers are waiting impatiently for legislation, hoping that it can open the economy for us.
Under the law, which was approved in March last year, farmers will be allowed to grow limited amounts of cannabis and sell it to licensed firms. But slow progress towards issuing these licenses means they must continue to operate illegally. They're also regularly targeted by police raids as authorities seek to dismantle trafficking networks and are now urging the government to speed up proceedings to allow them to earn an honest living.
We support legalization. People will at least be able to live in peace, without fear of prosecution. I can assure you that over half of the people living here have already been prosecuted because of cannabis.
Already the world's top hashish producer, Morocco hopes it can tap into a lucrative and fast-growing market that's already worth nearly €1 billion in Europe alone.
While staying in Morocco, climate change has cast uncertainty over the way of life of the country's nomads. For centuries, they have roamed the deserts with their animals, but ever more intense droughts have dried up the water point on which they rely. Take a look.
Surrounded by the barren hills of the Sahara Desert, these Berber nomads prepare a meager lunch in the blistering heat. A few hundred meters away from their camp, a rocky riverbed is beginning to run dry. Like many others, this family is struggling to survive in an increasingly hostile environment.
No one takes care of these lands anymore. They became arid and were affected by drought. There was no more vegetation and the water level decreased.
Morocco is currently experiencing its worst drought in over 40 years, and the situation is likely to deteriorate further, according to government forecasts. For nomadic tribes, which often travel in search of grazing and water for their herds, it's a millennia-old culture that's now under threat. Drought, as well as land privatization, has already driven many to leave their home regions, but even in their search of greener pastures, they often face resistance and hostility from local populations.
We would like to go to other areas, but people chase us away and tell us to go home. They won't let us settle anywhere else.
Assailed by nature and turned away by their peers, the ancient lifestyle of these nomadic tribes could soon become a thing of the past. The last government census in 2014 found that only 25,000 nomads still lived in the Moroccan desert.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Thanks very much for joining us. أهلا بكم في ثقافة في عدد اليوم. Ravi de vous retrouver pour Afrique Hebdo. Au programme cette semaine. نسمع بين حين والآخر. This storm has hit New York City a lot.
To be a president. 3, 2, 1.
Madagascar fait face à une seconde vague meurtrière.
Almost 99 million of you watch us every week. So thank you.
شكرا.
Gracias. Your confidence means a lot to us.
Muchas gracias.
شكرا على هذه الثقة.
Thank you.
Merci du fond de mon cœur.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. On France 24, watch exclusive interviews with the world's most influential personalities.
We need to act together because we're protecting our freedom.
Encounters with key political leaders.
L'inquiétude, elle est extrême.
Leading figures from the worlds of culture, sport and science.
La science, la recherche, la découverte, le progrès, c'est important, c'est pas des mots qui sont vides.
Whatever you think is right, you can do.
Watch The Interview, a meeting of ideas on France 24 and France24.com. Liberté, égalité, actualité.